Storytelling is universal and powerful. But we could all use a little help from time to time in our storytelling skills. Therefore, I'm going to be offering up a few tips in this talk. And this is the first one. We call it the and, but, and therefore template. I'll get to it in a few minutes, but I want to begin with a simple question, which is, how much time do you need to tell a story? Could you tell a story in just 1 minute? Could you do it in 30 seconds? Could you do it in 10 seconds? Could you tell a story in just 5 seconds? A few years ago, a website appeared called 5-Second Films, and I'm showing you one of their films right now, and as you watch it, ask yourself, does this tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end in just 5 seconds? Here we go.
Oh, fuck!
There you go. Does this one tell a story? Here we go.
Listen to this disc jockey's introduction to Montavani's Lazy Garden.
Not much. Total randomness. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In recent years, neurophysiologists at places like NYU and Princeton, and one fellow in particular, Yuri Hassan, have created neurocinematics, where they're using functional MRIs to look at brain activity of people shown films that do tell a story and films that do not tell a story. And not surprisingly, what they find is that when a story is being told, the brain activity from one person to the next is very similar. Basically, everybody is kind of on the same wavelength following the story, and that makes for great communication because you can start to insert information in the narrative structure and feed it to the audience. When there's no story being told there, the brain activity is very different from one person to the next. Everybody's all over the place. Communication is not very effective. So we can conclude that using storytelling narrative structure is a very effective way to communicate, and that's why we're here to talk about storytelling today. So the next question is, what's the quickest way to get into storytelling mode? And the answer for that comes not from this guy, but from this guy. Trey Parker, the co-creator of the animated series South Park. So a couple years ago, Comedy Central ran a documentary about the making of South Park, and in there he talked about what he called his rule of replacing that he uses in his editing process. When he writes a first draft of a script, and what he does is he goes back into the script and tries to replace the word and, wherever he finds it, with either the words but or therefore. Every time he can replace an and with a but or therefore, the storytelling gets more interesting. So when I heard that, I was instantly intrigued. What a simple rule. And I began thinking about this in relation to narrative structure. So here we have a simple story told in 3 acts, beginning, middle, and end. And most stories begin with a setup, with just some pieces of information called exposition. So if I'm going to tell you a murder mystery, I will begin by taking you to a small town. I will tell you about a family there, and about the father, and about the mother, and about the children. And I will use this word and as a connector to set up all this information. Now, this is the problem that a lot of scientists run into when they try and give presentations. I know, I was a scientist, I've listened to a million of these talks. They never get out of exposition mode. They never begin a story. They will tell you, here's our data, and here's a graph, and here's another graph, and here's another graph, and here's another graph, and here's our conclusions. And that's okay, it's nice and clear, but it's not as powerful as if they were to reach into story mode and put things together with a narrative structure. So how do you get into story mode? The simplest of all ways is with the word but, 3 letters. As soon as you say but, a source of tension or conflict has been established. So for example, in the murder mystery, told you about the mother and the father and the children, but then the father is found lying dead in the backyard. Now we have a story, something has happened. Now I can lead you on a journey in pursuit of the question, who done it, basically. And eventually when we get to the answer, we can pull it all together with a synthesis word like therefore. So and, but, and therefore, the simplest of all templates. Many of you may have heard this term, the elevator pitch, for years. I've found it in a lot of books and websites, but I've never seen anyone mention the actual structure of how you get to this. They always tell you it needs to be short and punchy and lively, but this is actually a template to shrink down a whole bunch of information into a single sentence where, for example, at the end of today, we're going to ask you to use this with the discussion groups when you come back to summarize everything you talked about in one sentence. So you will say, we talked about this and this, but we realized this, therefore we recommend in the future people work on something like this. A simple template to get into storytelling. So let me tell you briefly about my personal story, my journey using that. Once upon a time, I was a scientist, and I was a professor at the University of New Hampshire Marine Biology, and I received tenure. But then I realized I was more interested in the broad communication of science to the general public Therefore, I resigned from my tenure professorship in the mid-90s, moved to Los Angeles, went to film school at University of Southern California, got out, wrote and directed a few feature films, and eventually wrote a book pulling all this together and bringing it back to the science world as what I learned. And at the core of that whole journey, if I had to boil it down to one word of what I felt was most important, it is story or storytelling. And furthermore, in the book, I broke it down into what I call the two axes of storytelling, the vertical and the horizontal axis. So here is the vertical axis, which is the need to humanize the material in order to reach the general public. You've got to have something more than just the information in your head. You need to come down out of your head, into your heart with emotion, into your gut with humor and intuition, and if you are sufficiently narratively endowed, all the way down to the sex organs with a little bit of sex appeal. And that's the challenge, is moving down on this vertical axis. And then secondly is the horizontal axis, which is what I've been talking about here, narrative structure, the need to put the information together to conform with what we know pre-exists in the minds as a template for an easy way for information to be brought in. So since publishing the book, I've found two people in Hollywood to team up with in furthering this work, basically two artists, both actors. So the first of whom is Brian Palermo, who's a very accomplished actor. He was in the movie Social Network, and you see him on Jay Leno a lot doing comic scenes. He's also a member of the Groundlings Improv Comedy Theater, and he teaches improv techniques. And improv is sort of two things. On the surface, it's a lot of fun and games, but secondarily, at a deeper level, there's a mechanistic, physiological side to it, which is it's exercises that do pull you down out of your head into these lower organs, broaden your perspective, and humanize things. That's why the Groundlings get hired by a lot of big corporations to come in and do these days of improv exercises with them. And then secondly, for the horizontal axis narrative structure, another actor, Dory Barton, who's actually here with me today and will be in one of the discussion groups this afternoon. And she's been in movies like Meet the Fockers and Bewitched. But also, she has a background in narrative structure, and she works as a script consultant, working with screenwriters, helping them shape their screenplays into this very form, matching these templates so that they will work. So together, we work as a team now. The scientists teamed up with two artists. And so when I first heard that and but and therefore rule of thumb from Trey Parker, Dory was the first person I called up. And I asked her, have you ever heard this? And she said, no, I've never heard it put that simply. But it's actually very similar to something that's used a lot in Hollywood, which is what's called the Logline Maker. And this is what screenwriters use when they need to go into the studios and pitch their idea for a 2-hour movie that they've got to shrink it all the way down to just one paragraph. They're only going to get 3 or 4 minutes. And they need to do it very concisely so they're getting the whole story across and they're not going to lose the people. So this is a template. And there's several different versions. This is the one that Dory works with. I hope you can read that. And two things about this. First off, you notice it sounds just like a movie trailer. So, coming from a world where a blank is blank, and after the hero commits to blank, but when blank. And that's not a coincidence. This is what's usually used for the starting point for making the movie trailer, is let's take the log line and kind of expand it up from there. But secondly, look at what's at the core of it, is two of those three words, and but, and at the bottom you see the word so, which is about the same function as therefore. So you could see this is just a more elaborate version of the and, but, and therefore template. Again, it's what your brains are pre-configured to easily receive story structure as. And so it's used all the time by screenwriters. I want to use it now to finish with. This is the last bit. I want to pitch to all of you my idea for a movie and see if somebody has $10 million. I wouldn't recommend financing this idea for a movie, but here we go. So, coming from a world where TEDMED is an enormously influential event, a humble TEDMED speaker is faced with the challenge of motivating the audience to get interested in storytelling. And after he gives a really boring opening presentation, the speaker commits to learning more about storytelling, but when he is told he can never speak at TEDMED again, the speaker must learn how to convince the organizers to give him another shot in time to be ready for next year's TEDMED so that he will not go down in history as an utter and complete bore. I think you know the movie I'm talking about. It's coming in the year 2025. It's called Boring Speaker Resurrection. I can only hope that none of you make a cameo appearance in it when the day comes that we see this movie. And that is a few of the simple introductory basics on the how of storytelling. Thank you.